Captain Elias Danton stood at the edge of the grand balcony overlooking Earth's bustling capital city. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the skyline. The moment was quiet, almost serene, but inside, his mind raced with the weight of the decision he had just made. He had just agreed to a marriage, one that he never imagined would come his way. It wasn't just any marriage. This was a political arrangement, a forced union between him and Princess Serafina of the Sci-Fi Empire. The two nations had been at the edge of war for years, and this treaty, this union, was meant to stabilize a fragile peace. The marriage was to be temporary, only a symbol to show that Earth and Sci-Fi could work together. But no one expected the two of them to fall in love, and honestly, Elias didn't think that was even an option. When he had been chosen to marry Serafina, it had been a surprise. As a military captain, his life had always been about duty, strategy, and keeping his people safe. But this was something else entirely. He had spent his whole career avoiding political games, only focusing on what was real: the missions, the soldiers under his command, and the Earth he swore to protect. Now he found himself caught in the middle of a galactic treaty, with his future no longer in his own hands. Elias had been told that the princess was cold, distant, and ruled with an iron fist. Many of his peers had warned him about the challenges of dealing with someone of her status. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't about feelings. It was about securing a future for both Earth and the Sci-Fi Empire. As the door to his quarters opened, Elias turned to face the woman who had been chosen for him. Princess Serafina stood in the doorway, framed by the dim light from the hallway. She was striking, her alien features both beautiful and intimidating. Her skin shimmered with a pale, ethereal glow, a sign of her Sci-Fi heritage. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to pierce through him as if searching for something beyond the cold, calculated exterior she displayed to the world. She stepped forward into the room, her long, silver robes trailing behind her. There was no smile, no warmth in her presence, just a quiet strength. Elias couldn't help but wonder if she, too, was feeling the weight of the situation they were both in. After all, she had as much to lose as he did. "Captain," she said in a voice that was both soft and firm, a clear indication of the power she wielded. "I trust you understand the importance of this marriage." Elias nodded, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I do. It's for the peace between our people." Her lips tightened, as if holding back something, but she didn't speak for a moment. Instead, she walked over to the table where documents lay scattered, each one outlining the terms of their union. Her fingers grazed the papers as if she were examining a piece of art, her expression unreadable. "This marriage," she began, "is not just a gesture. It's the beginning of something much greater. Our two empires can thrive together if we do this correctly. The future of our people depends on it." Elias studied her for a moment, wondering if she believed her own words. She spoke with such conviction, but could anyone truly know what the future held? He had learned to rely on facts, not on lofty ideals, and yet there was something in her eyes, something that made him pause. "Understood," Elias said simply. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to make sure his people would survive the growing tensions in the galaxy. He had seen enough war, enough destruction, to know that this was a chance he couldn't afford to miss. Serafina looked at him, her gaze steady and searching. "I know you don't want this, Elias. I know you didn't choose this life. But I will make sure it is worth your while. We will protect Earth, and we will protect the Sci-Fi Empire." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of something more. But Elias wasn't sure what that something was. He had agreed to the marriage because it was the only option. Earth needed the Sci-Fi Empire's alliance, and the Sci-Fi needed Earth's resources and military support. This wasn't a love story. This was survival. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. Serafina stepped closer to him, her presence overwhelming despite her quiet demeanor. "I know we're both here because duty demands it, but that doesn't mean we can't make the best of it. Elias was taken aback by her words. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of something human in her eyes, something beyond the political mask she wore so carefully. It was a vulnerability, fleeting but real. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold, composed figure of the princess. "I'll do my part," he said, his voice steady, though inside he felt a knot of uncertainty tighten. He had never been a part of anything this complicated, and he certainly wasn't prepared for the complexities that lay ahead. Serafina nodded, as if satisfied with his answer. "We begin tomorrow. For now, I suggest we rest. There's much to prepare." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, her robes whispering as they brushed the floor. Elias remained standing by the balcony, staring out at the horizon. The peaceful sunset now seemed distant, as if it belonged to a life that was no longer his. His future had just been rewritten, and he wasn't sure what role he would play in this new chapter. The days after the wedding ceremony passed in a blur. Captain Elias Danton and Princess Serafina were now officially a married couple, though the reality of their union seemed far from personal. The grand halls of the Xylari embassy, where they now lived, were always filled with important diplomats, officials, and military leaders, each one reminding Elias that his life had changed forever. The marriage, as planned, was more of a political act than anything else. It had been a necessary step to ensure peace between Earth and the Xylari Empire, but Elias found himself increasingly questioning how much of it was a mere formality. Every day spent with Serafina revealed something new, both about her and about himself. Elias had expected the princess to be cold and distant, someone he could never truly relate to. But over the past week, he had started to see a different side of her, though she still carried the air of royalty. With a careful control over every word she spoke, there was something else beneath it. A sharp intelligence that never wavered, and a quiet determination to see the alliance succeed. Serafina had surprised him in their first few meetings. She wasn't the distant, uninterested ruler he had imagined. Instead, she was focused and calculated, always thinking several steps ahead. And while Elias had once believed that all political leaders were driven by selfish motives, he began to see that Serafina cared deeply for her people. One morning, as they stood side by side on the balcony overlooking the gardens of the embassy, Serafina spoke without turning to him. "The Xylari Empire is at a crossroads, Elias," she said quietly. "For centuries, we've lived in isolation, but the galaxy has changed. There are forces out there that threaten everything we've worked for." Elias glanced at her, surprised. He had expected her to speak of diplomacy or some political matter, but this was different. She seemed almost vulnerable. "I didn't realize how much of a threat you're facing," Elias admitted, his voice low. "But I'm here to help. You know that, right?" Serafina turned to him then, her dark eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, Elias could see the weight of her responsibilities in her gaze. She wasn't just a princess. She was a leader, carrying the hopes and fears of an entire empire on her shoulders. "I'm glad you're here, Elias," she said, her tone sincere. "But this goes beyond simple politics. The Xylari have enemies we can't even see yet. If Earth is going to ally with us, it can't be a one-time thing. This must be the beginning of something stronger, something permanent." Elias nodded. He understood what she meant, even if he wasn't entirely sure what it would require of him. He had never been a part of such high-stakes diplomacy. His military background had always been about clear objectives and direct actions. But this was different. "All right," he said after a moment of thought. "I'll do what I can. I'm not exactly a diplomat, but I know how to make people listen." Serafina gave a small smile, and for the first time, Elias saw a glimpse of warmth in her eyes. It was brief, but it was there. "I think you'll be more helpful than you realize," she said softly. "Your presence here isn't just a formality. Earth's military power could make all the difference." Their discussions continued over the next few days, slowly shifting from small talk to serious strategy. Serafina revealed more of her plans, outlining the challenges that the Sci-Fi Empire was facing in greater detail. There were rival factions, both within the Empire and outside of it, that sought to undermine her rule. The galaxy was a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and shifting loyalties, and Serafina was caught in the middle of it all. Elias listened intently, trying to piece together the bigger picture. He realized that the stakes were much higher than he had first thought. His marriage to Serafina was no longer just about Earth and Tylari. It was about the survival of both civilizations. One evening, they sat across from each other in the embassy's strategy room, surrounded by holographic maps of the galaxy. The air between them was thick with concentration as they discussed potential threats and the best course of action. Elias had always prided himself on his tactical mind, but Serafina's ability to think multiple steps ahead left him in awe. "We can't just sit back and wait for our enemies to make a move," Serafina said, tapping a few commands on the holographic table. "We need to act before they do." Elias looked at her, impressed. "I've never seen anyone think like you do. You're not just playing the game, you're rewriting the rules." She gave him a small, thoughtful smile. "You're not so bad yourself. You may not have experience in politics, but your instincts are sharp. I think we make a good team." Elias wasn't sure if he was ready to admit it, but he found himself agreeing. Despite their differences, her royalty and his military background, they seemed to complement each other. Where she lacked in military strategy, he made up for it. Where he lacked in political insight, she filled the gap. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. But the deeper they went into their discussions, the more Elias realized that their partnership was growing into something more. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about fulfilling a political contract. He was starting to respect Serafina in a way he hadn't anticipated. Her strength, her intelligence, and even her vulnerability were things he hadn't expected to admire. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think we're in this together," Elias said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Serafina paused, looking up at him. Her expression was unreadable, but for a moment, there was something softer in her eyes. "I think you're right." As the days passed, their relationship continued to evolve. What had begun as a political arrangement was now becoming a partnership, one built on respect and mutual understanding. The future of their alliance, and of the galaxy itself, was still uncertain. But together, Elias and Serafina were learning to navigate the challenges ahead, step by step. And perhaps in the process, they were becoming more than just allies. Captain Elias Danton had always believed that a soldier's loyalty lay with their people and their mission. It was simple, and it was clear. But now, in the midst of a galaxy filled with politics and fragile alliances, Elias found that the line between duty and personal connection was beginning to blur. The marriage that had once felt like an impossible task was slowly becoming something more, something he hadn't anticipated. It had been a few weeks since he and Princess Serafina had started working together. They had spent long hours in strategy meetings, discussing not just the threats facing the Sci-Fi Empire, but also how Earth could support them. The complexity of their task had brought them closer, and in the quiet moments between their discussions, Elias began to realize that he was starting to respect her. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a brilliant leader, a woman driven by a purpose that went far beyond her royal status. Elias had always been a man of action, someone who preferred taking command in the field, but Serafina's calm, calculated approach to problems had challenged him. She thought several steps ahead, always considering every possibility before making a decision. It was a method Elias hadn't encountered before, and though it frustrated him at times, he couldn't deny that it worked. One evening, after a particularly intense session of discussing military strategy, Elias found himself sitting alone in the embassy's garden, staring up at the stars. The night was quiet, but his mind raced with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The weight of his responsibility felt heavier each day, as he knew the consequences of failure could mean the destruction of everything Earth had worked for. Thinking about the future, Captain, came a soft voice behind him. Elias turned to see Seraphina standing at the edge of the garden, her silver robes catching the light of the moons above. She was no longer the cold, distant figure he had once thought her to be. Instead, he saw someone who carried the same doubts, the same pressures he had. It was a strange realization, seeing her not just as a political figure, but as someone who shared his struggles. "I was just thinking about what's at stake," Elias said, his voice low. "There's so much riding on this, Seraphina. So much we can't control." She walked toward him, her steps measured, and stopped a few feet away. "I know. But I also know that if we don't act, if we don't fight for this, we risk everything." Elias nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always been focused on the immediate challenges, missions, battles, and the next step to ensure survival. But what Seraphina had shown him was a broader vision, one where the future mattered just as much as the present. Earth and the Sci-Fi Empire could create something lasting, something powerful, but only if they were willing to sacrifice for it. "It's strange, isn't it?" Elias said, turning his gaze back to the stars. "How quickly we can go from enemies to allies. How quickly we can be pulled into something much bigger than ourselves." Seraphina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she joined him at the edge of the garden, her eyes scanning the horizon. For a moment, there was silence between them, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. "I never imagined this, she said, her voice softer now, more personal. "When I agreed to this alliance, I thought it would be temporary, a way to keep my empire safe, to keep my people alive. But now, I can see that we have the chance to do something no one has done before, something that could change the entire galaxy." Elias looked at her, surprised. He had always thought of Seraphina as driven by the weight of her responsibilities, her empire always coming first. But now he saw a different side of her, one that was filled with hope, not just for her people, but for the future. "I never thought I'd say this, but I believe it too," Elias admitted. "I think we could build something better, something stronger, if we do this right." There was a brief, understanding silence before Seraphina turned to him with a soft smile. "I'm glad you see it too. I know it's hard to imagine, but we're in this together now. Not just as allies, but as partners. Earth and Tylari can change things if we work together." Elias felt a warmth spread through him, an unexpected connection that he hadn't been prepared for. He had come into this union thinking it was just a political maneuver, something he would endure for the sake of peace. But now, with Seraphina by his side, he was beginning to see the possibilities of something far greater. They were building something, yes, but it wasn't just an alliance. It was the beginning of a partnership based on mutual respect, trust, and even something resembling friendship. The next few days were spent working even closer together. As their bond deepened, so did their shared vision for the future. The walls that had once existed between them began to fade, replaced by a growing understanding that they were both in this for the same reason. Their discussions were no longer just about survival. They were about creating a future where both Earth and Tylari could thrive together. One afternoon, after a long meeting with both Earth and Tylari diplomats, Elias found Seraphina in the strategy room, reviewing the latest reports. She didn't notice him approach at first, so he took the moment to observe her. She was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration as she processed the data before her. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader. And Elias realized, for the first time, that he admired her. "You're amazing," he said quietly, almost to himself. Seraphina looked up, her gaze softening as she met his eyes. "I'm not doing this alone," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm glad you're here with me, Elias." It was a simple statement, but it meant more than anything Elias had heard in a long time. He wasn't just part of a political agreement anymore. He was a part of something larger than himself, something that could change the course of the galaxy. And for the first time since their marriage began, Elias felt that he wasn't alone. The days at the Scifi embassy had become a blur of meetings, discussions, and strategy sessions. Captain Elias Danton had learned to adapt to the constant flow of information, but he couldn't deny that it was all starting to weigh heavily on him. The alliance between Earth and the Scifi Empire was stronger than ever, yet there was still something in the air, something unspoken, that made him uneasy. The threats they had discussed so far were troubling, but they had yet to fully prepare for what was coming. Serafina had spent countless hours warning him about the dangers facing both their empires. Enemies were closing in, ones they couldn't see, ones they hadn't expected. And although they had made great strides in securing Earth's support, the darker side of their alliance was starting to reveal itself. One evening, as Elias stood in the strategy room with Serafina, looking over new intelligence reports, the atmosphere was tense. The room was filled with holographic displays, each one showing different parts of the galaxy, military movements, new alliances, and growing unrest. But one report stood out more than the others. Elias, Serafina's voice broke through the silence. "I think it's time you saw this." Elias turned to face her, his mind already racing. Serafina's expression was grim, and he knew that whatever she was about to show him was serious. She activated a holographic display, showing the coordinates of a remote part of the galaxy. The area was marked by a red warning, indicating something was very wrong. "These are the Akari," Serafina said, her tone low. "A faction we believed had been destroyed in the Scifi civil war, but recent intelligence suggests that they've regrouped, and they're more dangerous than we thought." Elias's eyes narrowed as he studied the map. The Akari were notorious throughout the galaxy for their ruthless tactics. They were a militarized faction, known for using underhanded methods to destabilize entire empires. If they had resurfaced, it was a serious threat. "Why didn't we know about this sooner?" Elias asked, his frustration evident. "How is it possible that they've been operating without our knowledge?" Serafina's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and frustration. "They've been hiding in the outer systems, using technology that makes them nearly invisible to our scans. They've been gathering strength in secret." Elias clenched his fists, trying to suppress the anger rising in him. "We should have found them sooner. We should have been prepared." "We didn't know," Serafina replied, her voice softening. "And neither did Earth. But now we do. And now we have to act." She turned to the display, zooming in on the Akari's movements. The holographic map shifted, showing several ships and bases hidden in various locations, all connected by an intricate network of routes. It was clear that the Akari were preparing for something big. "We need to stop them before they can strike," Elias said, his voice firm. "This alliance, our people, everything we've worked for could be destroyed if they succeed." Serafina's eyes met his, a flicker of something dangerous and determined in her gaze. "You're right. We can't let them win." Elias had never seen her like this before. She was no longer just a princess, bound by the weight of her title. In that moment, she was a warrior, a leader determined to protect her people at all costs. "We'll need more than just Earth's military support," she continued, her voice steady. "The Scifi have lost too much ground already. We need to unite the galaxy against them." Elias nodded, understanding the magnitude of the situation. The Akari were a threat not just to the Scifi Empire, but to everyone in the galaxy. If they were left unchecked, the consequences would be catastrophic. But the task before them was enormous. They couldn't fight this battle alone, and they couldn't afford to make mistakes. "Let's put our plan into action," Elias said, his voice resolute. "We'll need a coalition, a united front against the Akari." Serafina looked at him, her expression softened by gratitude. "I knew you would understand." Together, they began outlining their strategy, focusing on gathering support from various factions in the galaxy. Elias had always been a soldier, trained to execute missions and lead troops. But now, he found himself in the role of a diplomat as well. He was tasked with negotiating with different races, convincing them that joining forces with Earth and the Sci-Fi Empire was their best option. And despite his limited experience in diplomacy, Elias knew he could do it. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. Over the next few days, the pace of their work increased. Serafina sent out ambassadors to other systems, while Elias coordinated with Earth's military leaders to prepare for the worst. The tension between the two empires was still there, but now they had a common goal, one that required them to put aside their differences and fight for something greater. As Elias and Serafina worked side by side, something unexpected began to happen. Their relationship, once rooted in obligation and duty, was slowly evolving into something deeper. They still didn't trust each other completely, but there was an understanding between them, an unspoken bond formed through shared purpose. Their late-night discussions about strategy, their quiet moments of mutual respect, and their growing partnership had begun to create a new connection between them. But despite the progress they had made, Elias knew that the real test was coming. The Akari were out there, waiting, and they weren't going to sit idly by. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting with the ambassadors, Elias found Serafina in the garden again. She was staring at the stars, just as she had before, but this time, there was a sense of sadness in her posture. Elias approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her. "Serafina," he asked softly. She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and exhaustion. "I never wanted this, Elias. I never wanted to be in this position, to have to fight for everything my people have." Elias stepped closer, his voice gentle. "But you are, and you're doing it for a reason. You're fighting for your people, for the future." She nodded, but the sadness lingered in her eyes. "I hope we're doing the right thing." Elias stood beside her, looking out at the same stars. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't alone in this. Together, they could face whatever the Akari and the galaxy threw their way. "We'll fight together," Elias said, "and we'll win." For the first time in weeks, Serafina allowed herself a small smile, a hint of hope in her expression. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for peace. The alliance between Earth and the Sci-Fi Empire had come a long way in a short time, but the threat of the Akari still loomed large over them. Captain Elias Danton and Princess Serafina had done everything they could to prepare, uniting as many factions as possible under their cause. But there was no escaping the fact that the Akari were not waiting for an invitation. They were already making their move. Elias had never felt the weight of responsibility more than he did now. As a soldier, he was used to fighting battles, taking command, and executing missions. But this was different. This wasn't just about strategy. It was about the future of two entire civilizations, Earth's future, the Sci-Fi's future. The fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. One morning, as Elias and Serafina reviewed their battle plans, a loud alert cut through the room, interrupting their discussion. "It's them," Elias said, his voice grim. "They've made their move." Serafina stood up sharply, her eyes already scanning the holographic displays. The Akari fleet had just entered a nearby star system, cutting off the only trade route between Earth and Sci-Fi. It was a bold move, meant to disrupt supply lines and throw both empires into chaos. "We don't have much time," Serafina said, her tone sharp. "We need to strike first." Elias nodded. "We can't let them control the space between us. If they do, they'll isolate us. We need to act now, before they get any stronger." The plan was simple. The Earth fleet would lead the charge, with Sci-Fi forces backing them up. They would hit the Akari fleet with a surprise attack, aiming to take down their command ship and disable their fleet before it could retreat. It was a risky plan, but it was their best chance to prevent the Akari from gaining an upper hand. Elias was given command of the Earth forces, while Serafina would lead the Sci-Fi fleet. As they prepared for battle, Ilias couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for peace, for a future where both their people could live side by side. "I know you don't like this," Serafina said as they walked together toward the briefing room, her voice low. "But we don't have any other choice." Ilias glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's not that I don't understand, Serafina. It's just, this isn't the way I imagine things going. We should be talking, negotiating, not fighting." "I wish we could do it your way," she replied, her eyes darkening with the weight of the situation. "But they won't listen. The Akari never do." Ilias sighed. He hated that she was right. The Akari were not known for diplomacy, and they had already shown that they would stop at nothing to destabilize the galaxy. The next few hours were a blur of final preparations. The Earth fleet was ready, their ships loaded and primed for battle. The auxiliary ships, sleek and elegant, were positioned alongside them, a testament to the strength and technology of the Empire. Despite the tension in the air, there was a sense of unity, something Ilias had never expected. Serafina's voice came over the comms as the fleets entered the battle zone. "Remember, this is about more than just victory. It's about sending a message. We will not back down." Ilias felt his heart rate quicken as the first shots rang out. The Akari fleet had already begun firing, but it was clear they weren't prepared for the combined strength of Earth and Tylari forces. The battle erupted around them, a cacophony of explosions and flashing lights as the two sides clashed in the cold void of space. Ilias's orders were clear. Hit hard, take out their command ship, and disable their fleet as quickly as possible. His ship, the Vanguard, surged forward, its weapons targeting the closest Akari vessels. He watched as his crew worked with precision, firing laser beams and torpedoes at the enemy ships. The strategy was simple: keep them on the defensive, force them to retreat. As the battle raged on, Ilias couldn't help but notice the sheer power of the Xylari fleet. Their ships were fast, deadly, and incredibly advanced. Serafina had been right to place her trust in them. They were an unstoppable force when united with Earth's military might. But even as they gained the upper hand, the Akari refused to retreat. They were relentless, throwing everything they had at the Earth-Xylari alliance. Their ships were maneuvering in unpredictable patterns, trying to break through their defenses. Ilias gritted his teeth, knowing that they couldn't afford to let the Akari break through. If the command ship escaped, it would mean more battles, more loss of life, and possibly the end of their fragile alliance. His thoughts raced, but his training kept him focused on the task at hand. "Target their command ship," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on the lead vessel. We need to end this now." The Vanguard locked onto the Akari command ship, and Ilias felt a surge of determination. They were so close. With one decisive strike, they could cripple the Akari fleet and bring the battle to an end. He pressed a button on his console, giving the order to fire everything they had. The Vanguard unleashed a barrage of laser blasts and missiles, hitting the Akari ship in a brilliant explosion of light. The ship's shields flickered and then collapsed, and in an instant, the enemy command vessel was disabled, floating dead in space. The Akari fleet began to falter. Without their command ship, their forces were scattered, their coordinated attacks broken. The Earth and Tylari fleets took advantage of the opening, pushing forward with relentless precision. One by one, the remaining Akari ships were either destroyed or forced to retreat. When the final Akari vessel disappeared into the vastness of space, the battle was over. The Alliance had won. But Ilias couldn't shake the feeling that the victory was hollow. The battle had been fierce, and while they had come out on top, the cost had been high. He could see the damage to both Earth and Tylari ships, men and women who had given their lives to secure this moment. And there were still questions left unanswered. Why had the Akari come back now? And what would their next move be? Serafina's voice came through his comms, breaking his thoughts. "We've done it, Ilias. The Akari have been defeated, at least for now. Elias nodded to himself, the weight of the moment settling on him. For now. But this isn't over. He turned to his crew, giving them a brief but sincere nod of appreciation. "Prepare for the next steps," he said. "We may have won this battle, but the war isn't finished. We have to stay ready." As the Earth and Tylari fleets began to regroup, Elias knew one thing for certain. The battle was far from over, and the path ahead would be more dangerous than ever. But for the first time, he felt a small spark of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. The victory over the Akari fleet was a relief, but it did little to ease the tension in the galaxy. Captain Elias Danton knew this battle was only the beginning. While the alliance between Earth and the Xylari Empire had proven its strength in combat, the true test would come in the days that followed. Would they be able to hold on to their hard-earned peace, or would new threats arise? Elias stood in the briefing room, staring out the large window overlooking the bustling city of Xylara. The sight of ships moving in and out of the spaceports, the gleaming towers, and the lively streets below reminded him of just how much was at stake. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about securing a future where both Earth and Tylari could coexist. Beside him, Princess Serafina entered the room, her silver robes flowing as she walked. Her expression was calm, but Elias could see the weight of the situation in her eyes. They had won the battle, but the victory had come with a cost. Many lives had been lost, and though the Akari had been defeated for now, the shadow of their return still loomed over them. "I've just received word from the Earth Council," Elias said, breaking the silence. "They want to discuss the next steps, how we rebuild, how we keep this alliance strong." Serafina nodded, though her gaze was distant. "It's more than just rebuilding, Elias. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. We need to find a way to secure our future." Elias turned toward her, sensing the frustration in her voice. He understood her concerns. Both the Earth and Tylari people had suffered from the Akari's assault, but Serafina was right. They couldn't afford to wait until the next attack. They needed to act now, while they still had the upper hand. "The Akari aren't the only threat out there," Elias said. "We've seen how quickly the balance of power can shift. If we don't take action now, we could find ourselves in even greater danger." "I agree," Serafina replied, her voice firm. "We need to create a system, a way to unite the galaxy, not just through force, but through trust. An alliance based on mutual benefit, not fear." Elias had heard Serafina talk about diplomacy before, but now he could see that she was truly committed to making it work. It wasn't just about politics for her. It was about the future. The idea of peace wasn't just an ideal. It was a necessity. Earth and Tylari had fought too hard to get to this point, and they had no intention of letting that effort be undone by old enemies or new challenges. Over the next few days, Elias and Serafina worked tirelessly, preparing for the upcoming summit with the Earth Council. They would need to present a unified front, showing that their alliance was not just a political maneuver, but a genuine effort to build something better. It wasn't going to be easy. There were factions within both Earth and the Xylari Empire who were skeptical of the other side's intentions. Trust was in short supply, and the scars from past conflicts were still fresh. As the day of the summit approached, Elias couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been growing inside him. The pressure to succeed was immense, and there were too many unknowns for him to feel completely confident. What if they couldn't convince the Earth Council? What if the Xylari couldn't trust the humans? What if this fragile peace would crumble under the weight of old grudges and new suspicions? Late one evening, after a long day of meetings and preparations, Elias found himself standing on the balcony of his quarters, looking out at the stars. The night was quiet, but his mind was anything but calm. The stakes were high, and he knew that everything they had worked for could be destroyed in a single moment of failure. Serafina appeared beside him, her presence almost ghostly in the dim light. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood together, watching the stars in silence. Finally, Serafina broke the quiet. "You're worried," she said softly. Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm worried that we're not ready. That we'll fail when it matters most." "I understand," she replied. "This isn't just about winning battles, Elias. This is about showing both our people that they can trust each other, that the future can be better than the past." He looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She was right. This wasn't just about strategy or military strength. This was about trust, something far harder to achieve. Trust between leaders, trust between people, trust that their alliance could survive the challenges ahead. "We've come so far," Elias said. "We can't afford to let everything fall apart now." Serafina placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly comforting. "We won't. We can't. But we will need to keep working. We'll need to be patient and strong. The road ahead will be difficult, but we'll face it together." Elias nodded, grateful for her words. In that moment, he realized that he wasn't alone in this. Serafina had become more than just a political partner. She was his ally, his friend, and someone he could count on when the weight of the world felt too heavy. The next morning, they stood side by side in the grand hall of the Xylari embassy as representatives from Earth filed in, ready to begin the summit. The room was filled with diplomats, military leaders, and strategists, all of them eager to hear what Elias and Serafina had planned. The tension in the air was thick, but there was also an underlying sense of anticipation. They had all fought too hard to get to this point. Serafina stood at the front of the room, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the gathered leaders. "We are on the cusp of something important," she said, her gaze sweeping over the room. "This alliance is more than just a treaty. It is a symbol of hope, a hope that our peoples can work together, build together, and survive together. We face challenges, yes, but if we face them as one, there is nothing we cannot overcome." Elias watched as the leaders listened carefully, some nodding in agreement, others still unsure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was clear that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. He glanced at Serafina, meeting her gaze, and for the first time since the battle with the Akari, he allowed himself to believe that peace wasn't just a distant dream. It was something they could make real. Together, they had already accomplished so much. Now it was time to ensure that their people, both Earth and Xylari, had a future worth fighting for. The journey ahead was long, but Elias knew that with Serafina by his side, they could navigate whatever came their way. The summit had been a success. The leaders from Earth and Xylari had come together, putting aside their differences for the greater good. It had not been easy, and there were still many challenges ahead, but the seeds of trust and cooperation had been planted. Now, Elias Danton and Princess Serafina could only hope that the future would prove them right in their belief that unity was the key to survival. Weeks had passed since the summit, and the two sides had been working tirelessly to solidify their new alliance. Earth's governments and the Xylari Empire were working hand in hand to create a plan for a lasting peace. There were disagreements, of course, but they were no longer about whether peace was possible. It was about how to achieve it. Every meeting, every negotiation, was a step toward a future they could all share. Still, Elias knew the road ahead would be full of obstacles. The Akari hadn't been completely defeated. While their main fleet had been crippled, their influence still lingered in the shadows. And there were factions within both Earth and Xylari who weren't ready to accept the alliance. Trust was not something that could be built overnight. Elias stood at the command center aboard the Vanguard, looking out over the vast emptiness of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, peaceful and distant, but the silence of space held a tension he could not ignore. Despite all their progress, there was still work to be done. Princess Serafina entered, her presence as calming as always. "You've been at this for hours, Elias. You need to rest." Elias gave her a tired smile, but shook his head. "I can't afford to rest just yet. We've made great strides, but there's still too much to be done. The Akari might be regrouping. We need to stay vigilant. Serafina walked up beside him, her voice soft yet firm. I understand, but we also need to look forward. We've been fighting for so long, Elias. We need to build something, not just defend it. He turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. You're right. We've been so focused on surviving that we haven't had the chance to think about what comes after. But this alliance, it's not just about fighting the Akari. It's about showing both our peoples that there's another way forward. Serafina nodded. Exactly. We can't keep living in the shadow of war. We have to build a future, one where Earth and Telluri thrive together, not just survive together. Elias felt the weight of her words. For the first time, he realized that the work ahead of them wasn't just about preventing future battles. It was about creating something that would last, a legacy of peace that would endure for generations. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, reports, and strategic plans. Earth and Telluri began to share resources, trade technologies, and strengthen their collective defenses. They were laying the foundation for a new era, one built on mutual respect and cooperation. But even as they moved forward, the shadow of the Akari still hung over them. Then came the first unexpected twist. A fleet of ships, none of them Akari, entered the star system near the Telluri capital. The ships were not from Earth, and they certainly weren't Telluri. They were alien ships, sleek and dark, and their presence sent a ripple of unease through the command center. Elias and Serafina quickly joined the command crew as the alien ships closed in. The unknown vessels didn't fire, but their intentions were unclear. Were they allies, enemies, or something else entirely? I don't like this, Elias muttered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the ship's movements. We need to make contact, Serafina said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. It's possible they've come to offer their support, but we can't take any chances. A tense silence filled the room as the communication systems were activated. The alien ships didn't respond immediately, but after several moments, a holographic transmission flickered to life. The figure on the screen was not humanoid, but its presence was imposing. A tall, angular being with a deep, resonant voice. I am Thaler of the Zoreth, the being said, its voice echoing in the command room. We have been watching your progress, Captain Danton, Princess Serafina. You have made a significant achievement by uniting your peoples. But you should know, the Akari are not the only force of destruction in the galaxy. Elias exchanged a glance with Serafina. Who are you? He asked, his tone cautious. We are the Zoreth, a race of explorers and guardians, Fiddler continued. We seek to help those who are willing to fight for peace. But know this, there are others who would see your alliance crumble, others who believe that war is the only path forward. Serafina stepped forward, her voice strong. We've fought too long to let anyone destroy what we've built. If the Zoreth are willing to help us, we will welcome you. But we will not allow fear to dictate our future. Fiddler paused for a moment before replying. Very well. We offer our assistance, but the road ahead will not be easy. The forces that seek to destroy you are vast and powerful. You will need more than just strength to win this war. Elias took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. We've already seen what happens when we fight alone. But together, Earth and Telluri stand stronger than ever. We will face whatever comes next as one. The Zoreth fleet remained in the system, offering their support in ways that were still unclear. They shared knowledge, technology, and strategies that could turn the tide of any battle. Their presence marked a new chapter in the Alliance's journey, one that would take them further into uncharted space and bring them into contact with more unknown civilizations. As the weeks turned into months, Elias and Serafina found themselves facing new challenges. But they were no longer alone. The Zoreth were a powerful ally, and their guidance proved invaluable in navigating the political and military complexities of the galaxy. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since the war had begun, Elias felt a sense of hope. The road ahead would be long, and the struggles would continue. But with Serafina by his side, and with the strength of the earth, Xylari and Zorith united, he knew they could face whatever came next. Together, they would build a new galaxy, one where peace was not just a dream, but a reality. The battle for the future had only just begun, but now, it seemed like they had a fighting chance.